It was a chilly, quiet autumn afternoon when Baron Trump, on a solitary walk through the woods near his family's sprawling estate, stumbled upon a conversation that would change everything. With his headphones in and his mind far from the tumult of the world, Baron had no idea he was about to overhear something that would shake the foundation of everything he knew. As he walked closer to the edge of the property, the voices of a group of locals drifted towards him. At first, they were just vague murmurs, nothing too extraordinary. But then, the words began to cut through the air, harsh, biting words about his father, Donald Trump. Words that were unforgiving, full of anger and disdain. They weren't just criticisms, they were personal attacks. Baron's heart began to race, each word he heard feeling like a blow to the chest. What had he missed? What did the townspeople really think of his father, the man he had always looked up to? And as the truth slowly began to unravel in front of him, Baron was faced with a painful realization, one that would change how he viewed not just his father, but himself. Baron stood frozen in the woods, his heart pounding as the words of the townspeople echoed in his mind. He couldn't believe what he had just overheard. The people he had seen around town, the ones who had always greeted him with a smile, were now openly mocking his father. The venom in their voices seemed to seep into the very air around him, making the forest feel colder, darker. He had always known his father was a figure of controversy, his name often preceded by strong opinions, both positive and negative. But hearing these voices, hearing the hate so plainly, it felt different. Personal. "He's a bully, always has been," the elderly woman had said, her voice full of disdain. "How anyone can look up to him is beyond me. He's ruined so many lives. He doesn't care about anyone but himself." Baron's stomach churned as the words struck him like a physical blow. His father, a bully. Baron had grown up watching Donald Trump handle everything: criticism, praise, business deals, international meetings with an air of unshakable confidence. His father was a leader, a person who carried an entire country on his shoulders. To hear these words about him, words that tore at the fabric of his father's identity, made Baron question everything. Was this what the world saw? Was his father truly the man these people were describing? Another voice, deeper and younger, joined the conversation. "He's only about himself, always was. His whole family's the same. Think about how he treats people, how he used them to get ahead, how he lies to get what he wants. It's disgusting." Baron clenched his fists, fighting the urge to turn and confront them. He wanted to run to his father, to defend him, to say that none of it was true. But what if it was? What if these people, the ones who lived right next door, knew something he didn't? What if there was a side to his father he had never seen? As the conversation continued, Baron felt his mind spinning. He had always admired his father, had looked up to him in ways that were almost sacred. He had seen his father's successes: the towering skyscrapers, the rallies, the television appearances, the business deals, but had he ever seen the price of those successes? Had he ever seen the anger, the frustration, the people left behind? The thought gnawed at him, unrelenting. He had heard rumors before. Everyone had. But to hear it so openly, so brazenly about his father, the man he had always trusted, was a shock he couldn't process. The sun began to set as Baron continued walking, lost in his thoughts. It was as though the very world around him was changing, and he couldn't keep up. The once warm, golden light of the evening now seemed muted, casting long shadows on the path ahead. His mind raced with questions, but there were no answers, no easy way to resolve the churning confusion in his chest. He kept walking, further and further away from the estate, into the woods that had always been his sanctuary. The rustling leaves, the birds flying overhead, none of it seemed to matter. All he could hear were the words of the townspeople, echoing in his mind. He had spent his entire life sheltered from this kind of criticism. But now, he was on his own, facing the truth of the world outside the walls of his father's empire. Baron found a small clearing in the woods and sat down on a fallen log. The cool evening breeze brushed against his face, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside him. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, opening the Notes app and typing furiously. He needed to write it all down: his thoughts, his questions, his confusion. He had never felt so alone. But as he typed, something else began to surface, a strange clarity. He began writing about his father, the man he knew, the moments they shared, the way his father had taught him about life, about standing strong, about not letting the world dictate who you were. For a moment, the fog of doubt cleared. Was his father perfect? No. Baron knew that. But he also knew the love and care his father had shown him. He remembered the times they had spent together, those small, intimate moments when it was just the two of them. His father's laughter, his encouragement, the way he always made Baron feel special, important, like he mattered. Baron closed his eyes, breathing in deeply. The questions were still there, swirling in his mind, but something had shifted. His father might have been a controversial figure, a lightning rod for criticism, but that didn't mean Baron had to accept the world's opinion as his own. He knew his father better than anyone. He knew the flaws, yes, but he also knew the heart. And that heart, no matter what the townspeople said, was one that had always loved him. Baron stood up, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. He wasn't sure what to do with all the emotions inside him, but one thing was clear: he couldn't stay lost in this confusion forever. He had to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. But more importantly, he had to face his father. The weight of the world had always been on Donald Trump's shoulders, but Baron was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, the weight was something he could share. With that thought, he turned and made his way back toward the estate, a little lighter than he had been before. As the night fell over Bedminster, the estate's grand silhouette cast long shadows across the grounds. Baron walked slowly, his thoughts swirling, struggling to reconcile what he had overheard with the man he had always known as his father. His steps were heavy, each one feeling like a burden he wasn't sure he could carry. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, and in that moment, the truth seemed elusive, clouded by doubt and confusion. But as he approached the front door of the estate, something within him shifted. The world outside had spoken its piece, but now, it was time to hear his father's voice. Baron had to understand, once and for all, what kind of man Donald Trump truly was. He couldn't carry this burden alone, not anymore. He reached for the door and knocked, the sound of it echoing in the stillness of the evening. The door creaked open, and his father stood there, looking at him with a curious yet understanding expression. Donald Trump's gaze softened as he saw the turmoil in his son's eyes. "Dad, can we talk?" Baron asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Donald Trump stepped aside, gesturing for Baron to enter. As the door closed behind him, the cold tension of the outside world seemed to dissipate. They were in the quiet of their home now, the place that had always been a refuge for both of them. Donald gestured toward the sitting area, where they could speak in private. "What's on your mind, son?" Donald's voice was calm, steady, but Baron could hear the concern beneath it, the way his father always made sure to be there for him, no matter the storm. Baron hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. He didn't want to hurt his father, but he also couldn't hide from the truth anymore. "I overheard something today." The townspeople. Baron stopped, his voice faltering. "They said things about you. Bad things. They said you were a bully, that you didn't care about people, that you only cared about yourself." Donald's face remained unchanged, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something raw, a hurt that only a father could feel when confronted with such accusations. But instead of anger, instead of defensiveness, he just nodded. "I know," he said softly. "I've heard those things before. And I'm sure I'll hear them again. People have their opinions, Baron. Some of them are true. Some of them aren't." Baron looked at his father, confusion and frustration bubbling inside him. "But how can you just accept that? How do you keep going when they say these things?" Donald leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Baron's. "Because, son, the opinions of others don't define who I am. They never have. They can judge me, criticize me, hate me, they can say whatever they want. But the truth is, I know who I am, and I know what I've done for this country, for you, for our family. I've made mistakes, and I've learned from them. But I've never stopped trying to do what's right by you, by the people who count on me. That's what matters." Baron's heart swelled with emotion. In that moment, he realized that his father's strength didn't come from his ability to silence his critics or to outmaneuver his adversaries. It came from his unshakable belief in his own truth. And that truth wasn't shaped by what the world said, but by the choices he made in the quiet moments, in the moments when no one was watching. "But what about me, Dad?" Baron asked, his voice cracking. "What about what they said about me? How do you think I feel, hearing people talk about you like that?" Donald's expression softened, and he reached out, pulling Baron into a tight embrace. "I know it's hard, Baron, but you're not responsible for what others think or say. You're only responsible for being the best version of yourself. And I'm proud of you, no matter what anyone says." The two of them stood there in the embrace, father and son, sharing a moment of silent understanding. Baron had expected confrontation, had braced himself for a fight. But instead, he found something deeper, something more meaningful. He found unconditional love, and the realization that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with words or power, but with quiet strength and resilience. As they pulled apart, Barron felt lighter. The confusion that had once clouded his heart had begun to lift. It didn't matter what the world thought of his father. What mattered was what they shared, the bond between them that no one could break. And as Barron looked into his father's eyes, he knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. As the night deepened and the estate grew quiet, Barron stood by the window, gazing out at the darkened horizon. The world outside seemed vast, full of opinions, judgments, and expectations. But as he reflected on the conversation with his father, something powerful began to take root within him, a newfound clarity that pushed aside the doubts and confusion he had carried for so long. Barron realized that in the end, the opinions of others didn't define who he was, just as they didn't define his father. It wasn't the harsh words or the criticisms that mattered, but the strength to remain true to oneself, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to love without condition. His father had shown him that it was not external approval that mattered, but the quiet, steadfast confidence that came from within. It's about being true to yourself, Barron thought to himself. About believing in who you are, no matter what the world says. The weight of the townspeople's words, the rumors, and the public opinions had once felt unbearable, like an invisible force crushing his spirit. But now, as Barron stood in the silence of the night, he understood that no amount of hate, no barrage of criticism, could take away the truth of who he was. And more importantly, it couldn't take away the love he had for his family or the strength that lay in those quiet moments of connection. He turned away from the window and looked at the man who had been the source of that strength, his father, a figure who had weathered storms, fought battles, and still stood unbroken. Despite all the noise in the world, his father had remained a pillar of love, resilience, and integrity. And Barron knew, deep in his heart, that he too carried that same strength. It wasn't just about enduring the storm. It was about using that storm to grow, to learn, to become better. It was about choosing to rise above the criticism, to lead with kindness, to be the change you wish to see in the world. Barron's eyes glistened with the beginning of tears, but this time, they weren't tears of confusion or sorrow. They were tears of clarity and understanding. The weight had been lifted, and in its place was the realization that true strength came not from how the world saw him, but from how he chose to see himself. With renewed determination, Barron walked to his father's side. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone spoke volumes. Together, they stood in the quiet, knowing that their bond, their unwavering support for one another, was unbreakable. As the night sky stretched before them, Barron felt a surge of hope rising within him. He had been given a powerful lesson, a lesson about resilience, love, and the power of choosing your own path. The world might be full of noise, but at the end of the day, it was the love and strength you carried within that made the difference. And as he walked into the future, Barron was ready to face whatever challenges came his way, not as the son of Donald Trump, but as Barron Trump, a young man grounded in the strength of his family's love, ready to carve out his own legacy of goodness and truth. This story wasn't just about a father and son. It was about anyone who had ever felt lost, anyone who had been weighed down by the opinions of others. It was a reminder that no matter how loud the world gets, the most important voice to listen to is your own. Stay true to who you are. Believe in your heart. And above all, remember, the power to change the world starts with the courage to change yourself.